ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mehlaka Samdani. It's wonderful to see you all here, despite the dreary weather outside. So thank you all for coming out. I am the director of Critical Connections, a nonprofit organization in Longmeadow, Massachusetts, that seeks to improve understanding of issues related to the Muslim world that affect all Americans. And so we are, on behalf of Critical Connections and our partner, Karuna Center for Peace Building, I'd like to welcome you all to our event today. It's part of our Transforming This Moment series, a series that has two tracks. The first track is sort of focused on civil rights and liberties of targeted communities in the wake of this election. So we put together events that raise awareness around those issues. And our other track is called Bridging Our Divides, and that focuses on sort of learning more about and addressing social, political, ideological cleavages that divide our communities. And so this particular event is sort of based on that second track. You will hear more about our partner, Karuna Center for Peace Building, an international peace building organization based in Amherst, a little while later in the program, and you'll hear from Olivia Dreyer, their executive director. And so coming to our event today, we sort of planned this a couple of months ago, and really planned this because there was a lot of concern about rising hate crimes and bias-related incidents, both during the election cycle and since the election. As you're all aware, I think 1 month after the election, Southern Poverty Law Center documented almost 1,100 hate crimes and bias-related incidents across the country. And interestingly, Massachusetts was number 4 in the list of states that were most affected. So we thought that this would be an event where we could learn about the resurgence of these hate groups, violent extremist groups, what are their operating strategies, how do they recruit, and what effective strategies can we employ to keep young, at-risk youth away from such organizations. Incidentally, we had also planned for this event to have somebody who was a former Muslim militant who could talk about their radicalization processes, but we couldn't find somebody for this particular event, but we do hope to have an event in the future that will focus on that issue as well. And so we also realized that, completely inadvertently, we held this event in East Hampton. But we also want to acknowledge the fact that over the past week, racial tensions have emerged within this very community. So people who are from East Hampton would know what I'm talking about in terms of what happened at the high school. And we do want to let you know that there will be a space later on in the program where you'll have an opportunity to really sort of talk about these concerns. And I'm sure our speaker will be able to give you great insights in terms of how to address some of those concerns that you have. So anyway, to sort of understand better how hate groups and violent extremist organizations and these very simple issues, we could not have asked for a better speaker and a better guest in Mr. Christian Picciolini, who has direct experience as he was a part of one of these white supremacist groups earlier on in his life. He has since devoted his life to being a peace activist and raising awareness around these issues. And we're very grateful that he was able to come all the way from Chicago to be with us today. And what I'll do is, before I introduce him, I'll just quickly give you a sense of how the format of the event is going to be. So for the first maybe 40-45 minutes, I'm going to ask Christian a series of questions. And so that will be the moderated part of this discussion. Then Olivia Dreyer will sort of take over, and we'll have small group discussions and then a larger Q&A as well. And Olivia will moderate that part of the discussion. So without further ado, let me just introduce Christian. First, if we could give him a round of applause for being here. Thank you. So Christian was born and raised on the south side of Chicago in a working-class neighborhood called Blue Island, the birthplace of the American white power skinhead movement. At 14 years old, Christian became entrenched in the first neo-Nazi skinhead gang in the United States. From violence to weapons, he immersed himself in the racist skinhead culture at an early age and quickly became one of the movement's most respected leaders and musical influencers. In 2009, Christian co-founded Life After Hate. He went on to earn a degree in international relations from DePaul University in Chicago, started his own global multimedia company, and was appointed a member of the Chicago Grammy Rock Committee. In 2016, he won an Emmy Award for directing and producing Exit USA's There Is Life After Hate PSA. He is a noted speaker, media commentator, and subject matter expert in far-right violent extremism. In 2015, he published his book, Romantic Violence, Memoirs of an American Skinhead. So again, So again, Christian, thank you so much for being here. And I wanted to sort of begin with your personal story. So you were 14 years old, living in Chicago, the son of very hardworking Italian immigrants. You weren't raised on racist beliefs. So how did you end up becoming part of this white supremacist group and a neo-Nazi skinhead group? And what led you to join it, and how were you recruited?
Well, first let me say that this is really the epitome of community engagement, and I commend you for being here, because I've spoken to other communities and have not seen this type of turnout and kind of the embracing of what a community ideal is. So hats off to you for being here, for talking about a very, very hard subject that's sometimes very difficult to broach, and it's really wonderful to see you here. As far as my story goes, in 1987, when I was 14 years old, I was a pretty normal teenager. I like to chase girls, I like to play baseball, but I also was very insecure and had low self-esteem. Just like every other teenager, there were three very fundamental needs that I was searching for: an identity, a community, and a sense of purpose. And those are fundamental needs that I think everybody in this room has gone through probably during their most vulnerable times as a young person. Is who am I? Where do I belong? And how do I affect the world or leave my mark or change the world? And that's something that we all go through. Unfortunately for me, even though I was raised by very loving parents in a very good home environment, my parents were Italian immigrants who came to the United States in the mid-1960s and had to work very, very hard to make it. So when they came, they opened a small beauty shop, and that kept them away from home 7 days a week, 14 hours a day. So while I was surrounded with love and I wasn't raised with racism, in fact, it was the opposite, because they were the victims of prejudice when they came to this country. I really felt abandoned by them. I didn't understand at that age why my parents weren't there for my school events, or why they weren't home when I came home from school, or why when I had a baseball game, my parents were the only ones that weren't there. I didn't quite understand that, so I felt very abandoned by them. And I went in search of this identity and this community, this sense of family elsewhere. So one day, when I was standing in an alley, 14 years old, and I was smoking a joint, a man drove his car up that alley, and he screeched to a halt just a few inches away from me. And when he got out of the car, he had a shaved head, and he was wearing boots, and he walked over to me, and he grabbed that joint from my mouth, and he said, "Don't you know that that's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile?" I was 14, I didn't really know what a communist was, except for my favorite movie, Rocky, with the bad guy and stuff. And I don't think I knew, if I'd met a Jewish person, I didn't know it, and I hardly knew what the word docile meant. But I was struck with this man's charisma. He was twice my age, and I had lived a very powerless existence. And he promised me one thing, and it was very simple. It had nothing to do with ideology, it had nothing to do with racism. It had to do with acceptance. And at 14 years old, I was brought in to America's first neo-Nazi skinhead gang by the man who was America's first neo-Nazi skinhead, who happened to live right across the street from where I lived. So, to some degree, I was a victim of circumstance. But I was also searching for something, and at a vulnerable age, he understood very well how to play to those vulnerabilities. The same way that many people today who are leaders within this ideology know how to pinpoint marginalized young people, maybe not even young people so much anymore these days, but just marginalized people who are looking for an easy solution for their problems. Because what the main crux of the movement is, or what a hateful ideology is about blaming somebody else for the problems that exist in your life, without forcing you to really reflect internally about whether you are party to that or whether you caused them or not. It's an us against them kind of mentality. So, I would say, just to kind of sum up, I was a normal kid who was looking for normal teenage things like identity and community and purpose. And suddenly somebody intercepted me when they knew that that's what I was looking for and didn't have a positive outlet for it. And they brought me in under the promise of paradise. They said, come with me and all your problems will go away. They gave me somebody else to blame. And that's essentially how I started out. And I stayed in for 8 years until I was 22 years old, so from 1987 to 1995, roughly.
So once you were sort of sucked into this group, how did you interact with other members of the group? And, did you talk about it when you heard them and, those who were completely immersed in the ideology? Were they talking about white identity and how it was under threat? And what did you think about that?
Yeah, it went from, it started out as a very soft, benign pitch, where I was told I should be proud of who I was, proud of my European heritage and proud of the accomplishments that white culture has brought to the world. That's how I was brought in. And I was pretty proud of being Italian. That's really kind of all I knew. So I related to that message. I didn't understand when the conversation started to go into, well, the immigrants are coming to take away your jobs. And I thought, well, my parents are immigrants and they've never taken anybody's job. They started their own business. So that didn't really relate to that at first. And I didn't really relate to the fact that they were blaming African Americans for coming into our neighborhood to cause crime, or Latinos who were supposedly coming into our neighborhoods to rape women and sell drugs, or the Jewish people who controlled the media and the finance system. I was 14 years old. I didn't see any of this. It didn't happen. But I believed it because I thought these people were smarter, because more than anything else, I wanted to fit in and matter above anything else. And I can tell you this because I've talked to at least 1,000 people who are both members of extremist groups and former members. And when I ask them, why did you join? Because I'm genuinely curious. Almost 2-1, every single one of them told me I joined because I just wanted to belong to something. And the ideology comes later. I mean, nobody's born racist. I certainly wasn't. There was something that I learned, and I learned it because of the other reasons. I wanted to fit in. I wanted a family. I wanted to be respected, and I wanted to change the world. And they kind of bastardized my altruistic sense of wanting to make an impact on the world and shifted it towards saving the white race. That became my mission because we were told that diversity was a code word for white genocide.
Mm. And so what was that point when you had sort of rose through the ranks in this group, and when did it turn into violence? How gradual was that process in which you felt like now I can actually perpetrate acts of violence?
It was relatively quick, I'd say, and more, not because the violence is something that attracted me, but because it was something that you almost needed to do to be accepted. But then certainly, I take full accountability. It was something that I became intoxicated with, that I fully did at my own volition, because it became something that kept me relevant in this movement. And not only did it keep me relevant, but it propelled me into positions of power. But I also, the older people set an example. So 2 years after I joined at 16 years old, the man who recruited me, who was America's first neo-Nazi skinhead leader, went to prison for a series of violent hate crimes. One of the first hate crimes in the history of our country. One of those was they saw a fellow skinhead girl hanging out at a bus stop with a black man. And they went later to her apartment and they beat her, they pistol whipped her, and before they left, they painted a swastika on her wall with their own blood. And for that, thankfully, they were arrested. But what that also did for me was now put me in a position where there was a void of leadership. And because now I had been around for 2 years, and because I had learned the propaganda methods, and I'd learned how to recruit, and I'd learned the rhetoric, everybody who was recruited after me, which was basically everybody who was left, looked to me as their leader. And now, for the first time in my life, I wasn't just this marginalized kid who was bullied growing up, or who didn't matter, or who was made fun of because my parents didn't speak perfect English. Now I had kind of stepped into a different level. I was a leader, and I was respected, and I was feared. And the bullies who picked on me now would cross the street when they saw me coming, and then later I would recruit them. So it kind of did a complete 180 switch, and all of a sudden I was intoxicated with this level of false power and false respect that just kept fueling me to do more and more and more. And it really was a chase of power, because for my whole life I had never really experienced that. And now that I had it, I wasn't willing to let it go. And I even did things, first of all, I always questioned my ideology. There was always something in the back of my mind, because of the way I was raised, that allowed me to question what I was doing. And I'm really, really glad that existed, because that really stopped me from doing some things that I know I would have regretted more than the things that I did that I do regret. And I credit my parents for that. I wouldn't have wanted to associate with them during that time, but what they taught me at a young age still lived inside of me. Mm-hmm. And I committed those acts of violence because I was angry, and being a part of that movement and having that ideology gave me a license, I felt like, to commit violence. I also feel like I acted out and hated other people, not because I hated other people, but because I hated myself. I was trying to remove the pain that I was feeling, the loneliness, and projecting that onto other people so that I wouldn't have to feel it anymore. I was transferring that.
So you mentioned your parents. Looking back at your processes of radicalization, what role do you think either your extended family, your parents, your educators, the schools that you were in, local community leaders, what role could they have played to keep you off of that path to begin with, or veer you away from it?
A lot. They could have done a lot. We didn't have, growing up in Blue Island, we were a pretty lower middle class neighborhood, very, blue collar. There weren't a lot of opportunities for young people, let alone adults. And what I'll say to that is, looking back now and doing the work that I do to help pull people out of hate groups for the last at least 15 years, I can say that young people want to be heard. They don't want to be talked to. They're smarter than we give them credit for. They're very ambitious, and they may not have the experience that adults have, but they really need to have their passions amplified at a very, very young age. As adults, we've been there. We know how hard it is to be a teenager. We know how hard it is to feel lonely or picked on, or how hard it is to work to fit in. And I think our job now, having learned those lessons, is we need to do everything we can to support young people in positive ways. That should be our mission. We should all be teachers. We should all be guides, and we should all be platforms and launch pads for the success of our young people. Because if somebody would have come to me at 14 years old and said, "Hey, you're a pretty good artist," or "Geez, you're pretty good at baseball," or you may be a good actor or whatever, I probably would have gone that way, because I was really screaming for somebody to just pay attention for me, and the person who heard me is the one who kind of took me under his wing. I never had teachers who said, "I don't agree with what you're saying, let's sit down and talk." I had teachers that suspended me and put me in detention and expelled me And I never had somebody pull me aside and say, hey, what you're doing is horrible, but I get it. I get why you're doing it, and it's not because of why you think you're doing it. How can I help you? How can I enable you or empower you to do something that you love instead of, just filling your life with all this hate so you get the attention that you're seeking in negative ways? So, I wouldn't have spoken to a police officer or a teacher or a counselor or a therapist or even a parent in those days because everybody was my adversary. Had somebody stepped in and said, I don't like what you're doing, but I get it. Let's find something that you're passionate about and what can I do to help you? I think most young people would really appreciate that because it seems that young people are often at odds with adults. And you have to understand, these young people, for the first 18 years of their lives, they live under a dictatorship, right? It's true. Parents, you tell them where to go, when they need to come home, who they can hang around with. At a young age, they're ready to be independent. They're ready to rebel and create that identity. We have to be careful because if we don't allow them to create a positive narrative for themselves and enable them to do that, somebody will come along and give them a narrative to adhere to. It will happen because kids are looking, and there are people who are very interested in providing that narrative that suits their own selfish needs. So I think we really need to embrace young people, listen to them, and then empower their passions.
My daughter does call me a dictator most of the time. So something to learn from me. Benevolent, that's what I think I am. But so, so how and when did you actually decide to leave the movement? And was it a gradual process or was it one pivotal transformative experience that got you to sort of move away?
Yeah, it was not an overnight thing. I didn't go to sleep one night, reciting Hitler speeches and wake up the next morning and saying, I love everybody. It was an 8-year process. Thank you. It was an 8-year process with a series of events. What it came down to is I hated people I'd never met. I didn't even know the objects of my hate. I didn't have meaningful conversations with African Americans or Jewish people or Muslims or gay people or anybody that was different than me. It just didn't happen. But at an age, around 19 years old, I opened a record store because I wanted to sell, white power music. That's all I knew. And I did, and I sold a lot of it. As a matter of fact, it became 75% of my gross revenue at my small record shop. This was before the internet, so people were driving from all over. But what also happened was because I wanted to be an entrepreneur, I started to sell other music like punk rock and hip hop and heavy metal. And when the customers would come in to buy that music, at first I was very standoffish. But the customers were Black and gay and Jewish and Asian and you name it. The more they kept coming back, the more the conversations turned away from, do you have this in stock, to more personal conversations. And for the first time in my life, I started to have really meaningful interactions with the people who I thought I hated. And for the first time in my life, I began to humanize them. And when the Black teenager would come in and I could tell he was sad, and then he would open up and tell me it was because his mother had passed from cancer, I knew that I felt the same pain that he did when my mother was diagnosed with cancer. Or when I saw the gay couple who clearly loved their son, I knew that they loved their son the same way that I loved my son. So suddenly I started to become very confused because the reality that was living in my head didn't match the reality that I was feeling with my heart. And I became very close to these people and essentially receiving compassion from the people that I least deserved it from, when I least deserved it, was what helped me make that transformation. And it was those things happening over and over and over. And I can tell you most of the people that I work with who, hate Muslims or hate Black people or hate Jewish people, they've never met them. They don't know. They've never had an interaction with them. So it's easy to hate somebody you don't know because it's easy to blame somebody. It's hard to love because you risk losing something when you love something. But it's also much more rewarding, and it helps you humanize and understand yourself and the world around us, and helps us realize we need each other to fix this broken world. And the more that we're polarized and the more that we're divided, the more our world is broken.
Great. So then you went on and co-founded Life After Hate. So could you tell us a little bit more about what led you to that and the kind of work that you do and who's involved?
Sure. So when I left the movement in 1995, I tried to outrun it. At the same time I left the movement, I closed my record store because I became too embarrassed to sell the white power music. And of course, because it was so much of my sales, I had to close the store. So I lost my livelihood. My wife and my children left me because they weren't a part of the movement. I hadn't left quickly enough. I didn't have a great relationship with my parents, and I lost my family when I left the movement. So I really went through a period of 5 years where I was suffering a major depression, where almost every morning I woke up and I considered taking my own life. Because even though I had started to treat other people with respect, I was miserable. But that was because I was outrunning who I was. I'd moved, I wore long sleeves, I'd grow my hair out, and I wouldn't talk about it. And then one day, a friend, one of the only friends that I had, came up to me and she said, if you don't do something with your life, you're gonna die, and I don't wanna lose you. And I said, okay, well, what do you suggest? And she said, well, there's this company I work for, it's a small company, maybe you heard of them, they're called IBM. And she said, you should apply there for a job. They're looking, for, a contractor temp worker. And I said, okay. But let me tell you something. I didn't go to university. I got kicked out of 5 high schools. I'm a former neo-Nazi. And by the way, I don't own a computer or know how to use a computer. What could they possibly see in me? And she said, oh, just tell them you're good with people. And I was like, So I did. I told them I was good with people, and I wrote my first, resume, and I lied on my first resume, and I got the job. And of all the places, literally millions of customers that IBM has, where did they put me? But my old high school that I got kicked out of twice to install the new computers for the school. Yeah. I was terrified. Now, this was 5 years after I'd left the movement, but I knew, I'd caused hell there. So they were going to recognize me within the first 5 minutes, and I was going to lose this first meaningful thing that happened to me. And of course, it's fate or karma or kismet or God's will or whatever it is that you believe in would have it. In the first 5 minutes on my first day at work, who walks by me but the black security guard I'd gotten in a fist fight with that got me kicked out for the second time. And I was terrified. I was a grown man, and I was sweating, and I couldn't think of words to say, and it was terrible. But I decided I had to do something, and I chased this man into the parking lot. Probably not a good choice. But I followed him to the parking lot, and I tapped him on the shoulder, and when he turned around, this beautiful, jolly black man who always had this great smile turned around, and he recognized me, and he was afraid, and he took a step back. And all I could think to do at that moment was just extend my hand and say, I'm sorry. And he shook my hand, and we talked, and we embraced, and we may have cried just a little bit. It was a long time ago. But he made me promise one thing. He made me promise I would tell my story, because he recognized that this wasn't just a story about a kid who became, a neo-Nazi skinhead. This was the story of every vulnerable young person who was looking for something and then was, intercepted by somebody with an agenda, and he knew that would relate to most young people, if not all of them. I didn't really understand what he meant. I started to tell a couple of people, and they couldn't believe that what I was telling them was, I was talking about myself, because they didn't know me as that person. But I was still a little bit skittish until 2004, on July 3rd, I got a phone call in the middle of the night from my aunt saying that my younger brother had been shot and killed. And I knew at that moment that I needed to tell my story, because it was important, because I knew that what had happened to me could affect any young person, whether it was somebody from the inner city who was being groomed by a gang, or somebody who could be flying to Syria to join ISIS. It was really the same. It's that same lure, that same striving for identity and community and purpose. And the ideology is just the tie that binds them. It's not what draws them in. And I recognized at that point, because it was so hard for me to break away and talk about my past, that I knew it must be hard for other people who were in the movement to do that too. So in 2009, I co-founded Life After Hate as a support mechanism to help people disengage from hate groups and hateful ideologies. And I'm happy to say that since 2009, we've built a network of over 100 people that we've helped leave hate groups. And you know what's interesting is the way that we do that, the way that we've been so successful, is not by battling ideologically with them, because that just kind of polarizes you further. It's never solved anything. We don't get violent. We don't attack them. We listen. We listen. Because when we listen, inevitably they will tell us what the potholes are in their lives that exist that deviated their path. I call them potholes. Because when I identify those potholes, and it could be unemployment, could be poverty, could be trauma, could be mental illness, it could be having a swastika tattooed on your face, which makes it very hard to get a job, believe it or not. I fill those potholes in with things to make them more resilient. So it could be job training, it could be education, could be tattoo removal, it could be mental health therapy, whatever it is. I am trying to make them more resilient without even discussing ideology with them. And what's magical about that is once these people become more self-sufficient, more resilient, more self-confident, the ideology falls away, because it was just a crutch to begin with to blame somebody else for their problems. And when they don't have those problems, and when they feel more secure about themselves and they surround themselves with love, they don't need that crutch anymore. I also employ immersion techniques where I will introduce them to the objects of their hate in a safe way. One instance of that was, do I have time to tell this story?
Yes, okay, please.
A man read my book from Buffalo, and he emailed me and he said, I've got some questions about your book. Oh, and by the way, I hate Muslims. I said, okay.
You're not the only one.
Yeah. I said, I've heard that before. And I spoke to him on the phone, and after a couple of times, he told me, he said, I was walking my dog in the park and pushing my daughter in a stroller, and I saw a Muslim man praying, and all I wanted to do was go up to him and kick him in the face. And I said, Daryl, I am flying to Buffalo tomorrow, take the day off. And I said, I'm flying, you're taking a day off, and we need to talk. So I got there and we talked, and we had breakfast and coffee. And when I'd asked him if he'd ever met a Muslim before, he said, no, why would I want to do that? I hate them, they're evil. And I said, okay, excuse me, I need to go to the other room. I'll be right back. I got on my phone, I looked up the local mosque, and I called, and I spoke to the imam there, and I said, Imam, I have a Christian man here who would love to learn more about your religion. Did you think I was going to tell him the truth? And he said, sure, come on over, but I've only got 15 minutes because I have to prepare for my prayer service. And I said, sure, we'll be right over. It's only 5 minutes away. So I tell Daryl, I said, let's go get something to eat. And we get in the car, and halfway there, I said, oh, but we have to stop somewhere first. I said, we're going to stop at the mosque. And he said, turn around. I don't want to go. I want to throw up. I said, I don't care. It's a rental car. Go ahead, do your business. We're going. I came to Buffalo. The least you can do is go with me. So we went there, and I finally convinced him to go, and we knocked on the door, and the imam answered, and he said, I've only got 10 minutes now. Come on in. And I said, we'll take it. We spent 3 hours there talking to the imam, and they were both discussing their religion, and after a while they were crying and hugging, and we were all just ugly crying, and after a couple of more visits over time, I'm happy to say that Daryl and the imam are best friends. They go out for falafel every Wednesday.
It's a great story.
We really need to do a better job of understanding each other. Empathy really is what changes the world. And there's a major lack of empathy because there are two realities happening, right? So a lot of people ask me, like, I just don't understand why these racist people are like this. Like, why don't they see what I see? And I tell them because there are two realities. There are people that think very emotionally, almost kind of like with the reptile brain, fight or flight instinct, and they're afraid. And everything that's different from them is a source of fear. And I always say that hatred is born of ignorance. Fear is its father, and isolation is its mother. When we're afraid of what we don't understand, and we never have a chance to connect with it to understand it, that creates hate because it becomes a threat. And we need to do a better job of building that bridge of empathy and compassion and understanding each other, knowing that we're going to have differences. We are different. We're all different. Every single person here, regardless of race or religion, we're all different. If you had a twin, you'd be different from them. But those are the things that make us unique and special, not things that drive us apart or things that complement us. Our greatest import as a nation is the immigrant. That's why we are America. That's what makes us great. And to take that away or to say otherwise, in my opinion, is the most un-American thing that we could possibly do.
Absolutely. So, Christian, in the current socio-political context, another trend that we've been seeing is that, there's a lot of sort of prejudice and, bigotry that people have held inside for a very long time. Some have, very overtly expressed it as well. But in the wake of this election, we're just seeing so much of that, where people feel like they have license to express that hostility very openly. We've seen the sort of emergence of swastikas on college campuses, racial slurs, all of those things happening on a much regular basis. And you talk about empathy, but then how do you understand this phenomenon where people are feeling much more empowered to do this? And how do you engage in empathy with somebody like that? Like, where does that intervention need to take place?
Well, I can explain it pretty easily because 30 years ago I was part of creating it. We had this idea 30 years ago that the swastikas and the shaved heads and the boots were even turning away the average American racist. And it's true. And we said to ourselves, these boots and these swastikas and these flags, we got to get rid of that stuff. We have to, wear suits and ties. We have to go to college. We have to, get jobs in law enforcement, run for office. We have to do all these things. And by the way, now the cool word for what we started 30 years ago is the alt-right, which is no different than what we were. It's just different packaging. It's marketing savvy is what it is. And they've taken their message and they've made it a little bit more palatable so that it appeals to the masses. And they've found kind of the common enemy that everybody seems to be afraid of right now, which is, the Muslim. Because it's I don't want to say a new phenomenon because y'all have been here since the beginning of this country. But now it seems to be kind of the flavor of the month of who we're picking on. And because of the refugee crisis and because there is kind of this influx of people who are looking for a safer place to live, certain politicians are using fear tactics and fear rhetoric to make people more afraid. It's the exact same thing that we did 30 years ago. In fact, some of the words are exactly the same. But what they've done is just massaged some things and made it just a little bit easier to swallow for somebody who has a grievance, somebody who maybe lives in middle America or somebody who's had an issue in the past. They amplify that. This fake news and propaganda that we hear about, it's real, okay? It's not real in the sense that it's real news. It's real in the sense that it's fake news. It exists. And it exists because we started putting this stuff out even before I was a member, 40, 50 years ago, these conspiracy theories. Now the internet has just made it a really easy place to find it. I used to get pamphlets and books that I had to read. Now you just kind of click around and you go down this rabbit hole because of the algorithms on the internet, kind of like when you go to Amazon and it says, oh, you liked Pampers, you'll like Huggies. The same thing happens with news, right? If you go down, and start reading some fake news stuff, well, it keeps recommending more of that same fake news to you, and before you know it, that defines your reality. And anybody who thinks different from you must be crazy, because what are they reading? You know, like I read all the news, right? So we both live in two different realities. There's a schism that's happened. And it's very dangerous, because there are millions of young people sitting behind computer screens who feel marginalized, who don't fit in real life, who maybe are socially awkward, and are now finding an identity and a community online. And they create this persona online that in normal real world they would never do, because they don't feel comfortable doing that. So that's why this is flourishing. That's why we're seeing more of this. And the politicians are really emboldening these people who once lived in the shadows to now come out of the shadows. But it's very hard to see who they are, because they look just like us. In the old days, you'd be able to spot a skinhead or a Klansman a mile away, right? It's easy. Nowadays, that's passé. And when we think of hate groups, that's what we think about. Hate groups are not the problem. The problem is this individualized radicalization that's happening because of fake news, and they're finding these communities online. That's the issue. And of course, because politicians, in some cases, seem to reinforce a lot of that.
Are there some warning signs that parents can look to, like, you know, if they fear that their child might be engaging in online radicalization or might be in the process of being recruited?
You know, there's really no single profile, which makes it hard. However, there are certain things you can look for. First of all, don't let it get to that point. Engage your kids from a very, very young age. Make them feel loved, teach them empathy, and support their passions. But of course, you know, that doesn't always happen, and there are circumstances where kids have to find their own path, and sometimes they land in the wrong place. You know, certainly if they're reading kind of this alt-right propaganda online, you know, if they have these very black and white, thinking, and critical thinking skills are kind of minimized. Certainly language, it's kind of the same thing that you look for if your kid's getting into drugs or in a gang, right? Do they abandon all the things that they used to love to do? Does their attitude change right away? Do they change the way they, you know, certain words are being used? Do they withdraw and find a new group of friends? Those are all things to look for, but certainly that's no indication that your son or daughter or friend is going to become an extremist. But those are all warning signs of something is wrong, and you should probably, you know, address it somehow.
Great, thank you. So just my last question now, what advice do you have? I mean, given the sense that there's so much overt expression of hostility, especially for young people, what advice do you have to sort of try and cope with all of this hate speech that is out there and racial slurs on social media? How do you, what advice would you give them to sort of deal with that?
Well, you know, I heard from a very, very important person with very wise words that I think you guys probably all know. Dr. Martin Luther King is, you know, hate cannot drive out hate, only love can. So I think we need, when we do see something like that, I think the right way to respond is not to attack, is not to confront, but also not to be quiet. I think we need to stand up and surround the people who are being affected with love. Both the victims and the perpetrators. And I know that sometimes is not a very positive sentiment, because you know people are cheering when you know Richard Spencer gets punched and you know things like that. And as happy as it makes me to see you know a Nazi put in his place, violence is not the right answer, because that, I tell you, if that would have happened to me when I was 19 years old, I would have been put in jail, because I would have come back with a gun or something like that. That's not the right way to do things. So compassion, you know, as hard as it is to give to some people who you don't think deserve it, they're the ones that need it the most. They're the ones who really need your compassion, because that's what's going to penetrate them, not you know more words of aggression or anything else. So we need to find it in us to give the people who least deserve the compassion that they deserve or that they need. Okay?
Easier said than done
True.
sometimes, right? But thank you so much, Christian. Thank you so much for your insights.